I need to read the transcript first before writing the new story. Now I have everything I need. Let me write the new story. The night Penny Boone spilled a tray of water glasses on the most dangerous man in Detroit. She didn't apologize. That wasn't arrogance. Penny had long since burned through her quota of apologies, one for every time a man had walked into her section at the Starling Club and looked straight through her like she was a coat rack in a skirt. She was used to it. At 27 years old, 5'4", and somewhere north of 270 pounds, Penny had become fluent in the language of invisibility. She knew exactly how long she could stand at a table before a customer remembered she was human. She knew which patrons would order without making eye contact, which ones would leave the tip on the far edge of the table so they didn't have to hand it to her directly, and which ones would mutter something ugly under their breath, thinking she had already moved on. She always heard them. That was the thing about being invisible. You had to develop compensatory senses just to survive it. The Starling Club was a landmark in the old Corktown neighborhood, the kind of establishment where the walls had absorbed 70 years of cigarette smoke and quiet crimes, and no one asked questions about either. It wasn't a restaurant so much as a stage where Detroit's serious money conducted its most delicate theater. Penny had worked there for 3 years. She knew every booth, every sight line from every window, every corner where the lighting was deliberately dim. She knew the lunch regulars, the dinner regulars, and the men who only came in after 10 o'clock with no reservation and were seated immediately. One of those men was Cato Aldano. She had recognized him from the first night he walked in, the same way you recognized weather coming. He didn't announce himself. He moved like the room already belonged to him, and the rest of the occupants were on temporary permits. 42 years old, according to the few things she had overheard. Dark-haired, broad through the shoulders, with a jaw like a wall, and eyes so black they seemed to absorb rather than reflect the candlelight. He sat at the same corner table every time, back to the wall, clear line to the exit, positioned to see everyone who came through the door before they saw him. He never ordered from the menu. The kitchen simply sent out what he wanted. He always said thank you. Quietly, without ceremony, the way a man says it, when he actually means it, rather than performing it. Penny had noticed that about him before anything else. The night everything changed was a Thursday in November. The kind of cold that made downtown Detroit feel abandoned even when it wasn't. The Starling Club was full, a private party for some shipping magnate's birthday, swallowing up the front half of the dining room, leaving the back section to the regulars. Penny was running 3 tables simultaneously when she caught the sound she had learned to pay attention to. A change in the quality of the silence around Cato Aldano's corner. He had a guest tonight. That was unusual. The man across from him was named Prescott. She didn't know his first name. She knew him from 2 previous visits, a tall, florid-faced man who wore expensive watches and had the over-groomed confidence of someone who had inherited money rather than made it. He had once snapped his fingers at Penny from 6 feet away and left her a $4 tip on a $200 tab. She had memorized his face the way she memorized most things that posed potential problems. She approached with a fresh water carafe and a polite, blank expression. "You can leave it," Prescott said, not looking at her, gesturing at the table edge the way you'd wave off a fly. Penny set the carafe down and began to step back. That was when she saw it. She saw it because she was taller than Prescott expected, because the candlelight hit the angle of his hand at precisely the wrong moment from his perspective and precisely the right moment from hers. She saw the way his index finger dipped into the breast pocket of his jacket and came back out curled around something that caught no light at all. She saw the practiced economy of the motion. This was not the first time he had done this. She saw the tiny folded paper between his knuckles, and she watched it open almost imperceptibly over the rim of Cato Aldano's brandy glass as Prescott laughed at something he himself had just said. A powder, fine as confectioner's sugar, gone in an instant. Penny stood still for one full second, feeling the information move through her like electricity through water. She did not scream. Screaming would accomplish nothing but chaos, and chaos had a body count. She did not grab the glass. Too obvious, and Prescott would see, and a man who had just poisoned someone's drink was not a man she wanted paying attention to her. Instead, Penny did what she had done 1,000 times in this dining room. She became part of the furniture. She stepped backward toward the service station, keeping her expression identical to what it had been. The mild, polite blankness of a woman doing her job. She counted to 12. Then she turned and walked back to the table with a fresh glass of brandy on her tray, a folded cloth napkin, and a small ceramic dish of salted almonds. "My apologies," she said, her voice coming out steady, which surprised her. "I brought the wrong vintage earlier, mister. Aldano's standing order is the 09, and I poured the 11 by mistake. Allow me." She reached across the table and smoothly lifted Cato's glass with the napkin draped over her hand, a gesture that looked like standard service protocol, a waitress avoiding fingerprints on crystal, and set it onto her tray, replacing it with the fresh pour. Prescott finally looked at her, just for a moment. Just long enough for something calculating to flicker behind his eyes. "That's fine," Cato said. She walked to the back of house, ducked into the prep kitchen, poured the contaminated brandy straight down the drain of the deep sink, and ran hot water over it for 15 seconds. Her hands were shaking badly by the time she set the empty glass on the rack. She made herself take 3 slow breaths, then she walked back out. She lasted 40 more minutes before Prescott left, pressing Cato's hand warmly on his way out, and promising to deliver the contract terms by the following Monday. She watched him go with the careful, unreadable expression she had spent years perfecting. When she finally circled back to clear Cato's table, he was still sitting there. His black eyes tracked her from the moment she appeared in his peripheral vision. "Bring me whatever you poured down the drain," he said quietly. "And sit down." Penny looked at him. "I can't sit with—" "Sit down, Penny." She sat down. He knew her name. She didn't know how that surprised her, exactly. His kind of man knew everything, that was the whole point. But hearing it in his voice, low and deliberate, made the back of her neck prickle. He placed both hands flat on the table between them and looked at her the way she imagined. Scientists looked at something they couldn't yet classify. "You've worked here for 3 years, he said. "I have eaten in this room approximately 60 times during that period. I have never once seen you make a wrong pour." Penny said nothing. "The 09 and the 11 are stocked on the same shelf. You've brought me a brandy without error for 18 months. He tilted his head very slightly. "What was in my glass?" The silence stretched out long enough that the ambient noise of the restaurant filled in around them, silverware, a burst of laughter from the birthday party, the low murmur of the jazz trio in the front room. "I don't know exactly," Penny said finally, "but it wasn't good, Prescott. It wasn't a question. He did it when you looked at your phone," she said. "Breast pocket. Very practiced. I only saw it because I was standing at the angle I was standing at, and even then only for about a half second." Cato looked at her for a long time without speaking. "You could have walked away," he said. "Yes. You could have spilled it and played clumsy. Made it obvious. That would have told him someone noticed." Cato was quiet again. He picked up the fresh brandy glass and turned it slowly in his fingers without drinking from it. "Why didn't you walk away?" he asked. Penny considered the question. She considered the honest answer, and then she considered the cost of giving it to this man in particular, and she decided it didn't matter anymore whether it cost her anything or not. "Because you're the only person who has ever eaten in my section and treated me like I exist," she said. "Every person in this dining room has called me something in their head if not out loud. I can see it every single time I walk up to a table. You never did that. You learned my name, you say thank you, and mean it. She paused. You're probably a terrible person in 50 ways I don't know about yet. But to me, for 3 years, you have been decent, and decent is rarer than you think. The corner of his mouth moved. It was the smallest possible expression, the kind that would have been invisible on any other face, but on his it registered like a seismic shift. Go get your coat, Cato said. I still have a shift, Penny. He reached into his jacket, produced a card, and set it on the table in front of her. On it was a single phone number. Go get your coat. She stared at him. I'm not finished protecting you yet, he said, but I need you somewhere I can do it properly. The next morning, Penny sat across from Cato Aldano at a kitchen table that could have comfortably seated 16 people, wearing borrowed clothes and drinking the best coffee of her life, while he explained with complete and unhurried calm that Prescott had been attempting to maneuver the Aldano organization into a power vacuum for the better part of a year, that the poison in the glass had probably been a compound called aconitine. Fast-acting, very difficult to trace, almost impossible to identify unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. That 3 of Cato's trusted lieutenants had almost certainly been feeding Prescott information from the inside, that Cato had been growing blind in his own house and hadn't known it. You're telling me all of this, Penny said carefully, because you think I can help. I'm telling you all of this, Cato said, because you already did help and you deserve to know what you walked into. She looked at him across the vast expanse of that kitchen table. Morning light came through tall windows and landed on the side of his face, and he looked, just for a moment in that specific light, like a man who was very tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. What would you need from me? She asked. He told her. It wasn't what she expected. He didn't want muscle. He didn't want a decoy or a distraction or someone to play a role in some elaborate scheme. What he needed was simpler and more fundamental than any of that. He needed someone who moved through rooms the way the wind moved through a room. Someone who was present without registering as present. Someone who people spoke freely around because they had already dismissed her. Society spent 27 years teaching you to be invisible, Cato said. That's not a disadvantage. That is the single most valuable operational skill I've encountered in 15 years of this business. I'm a waitress, Penny said. You're a woman who spotted a poisoning in half a second that my 2 closest security personnel completely missed, he replied. From an angle they didn't have, and using instincts they've spent years training for and still don't possess. Stop describing yourself by your job title. Penny thought about that for a long moment. She thought about 3 years of carrying plates for people who wouldn't look at her. 3 years of absorbing the casual cruelty of the well-dressed. 3 years of hearing things she was never supposed to hear because she wasn't considered worth the trouble of discretion. All right, she said. Tell me about the men you think are leaking. There were 3 names, Harwick, Aldgate, and a man referred to only as the councilman. Over the following 2 weeks, Penny watched all 3 of them. She did it the way she had always done everything, quietly, from the edges, in the spaces where people forgot to guard their expressions. She went back to work at the Starling Club as if nothing had changed. Harwick came in on a Tuesday with a woman who was not his wife, and Penny refilled their water glasses 4 times and heard him make 2 phone calls outside, one of which included coordinates she memorized and passed to Cato that same night. Aldgate was easy. He was sloppy, the way frightened men get sloppy, and she caught him palming an envelope to a man she didn't recognize on his way out of the restroom. She photographed the stranger's face with the camera in her serving apron pocket, the one Cato had given her, small enough to look like a button. The councilman was harder. He was careful. He had the instincts of a man who had been corrupt for so long that deception had become second nature. But 3 days before the charity dinner at the Meridian Foundation, the annual event where money changed hands and allegiances were quietly renegotiated, Penny was polishing silver at a back table when she overheard him on his phone in the coat room, door cracked 2 inches, voice low but not low enough. "Tell Prescott the window is the Meridian dinner," the councilman was saying. "Aldano will use the lower service exit. I'll have his security detail reassigned to the perimeter before 9. Tell Prescott to have his people in the alley by 9:15. Penny set down the silver. Her heartbeat was entirely steady. She found Cato at the Meridian dinner, standing near the orchestra platform, looking like he had been poured directly into his black tuxedo. She appeared at his elbow so quietly that the man to his right startled slightly. Cato did not startle. He turned and looked at her, and whatever he read in her expression made his entire body change without moving at all, a stillness that was somehow more kinetic than motion. "Service exit," she said, barely above a breath. 9:15, the councilman moved your security detail. Prescott has men waiting. Something moved through Cato's eyes. He looked at her for a long moment, and in that moment, Penny saw something she hadn't expected. Not relief, not calculation, but a kind of grief. Because this was the councilman. This was someone Cato had known for 11 years. Someone who had sat at his table and been trusted with things that weren't easily trusted. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. "I heard him on the phone 40 minutes ago," she said, word for word. He was quiet for 3 seconds. "Go to the Grand Hall," Cato said. "Stand near the east entrance. Don't leave the main room until I send Raymond for you." "Cato, please," he said. It was such a different word coming from him. It fit differently in his voice than other words did. "Please go stand somewhere safe." She went. She didn't know exactly what happened in the 90 minutes that followed. The Meridian dinner continued in the Grand Hall. Speeches, applause, the tidal movement of people redistributing themselves between courses. Penny stood near the east entrance and watched the room and tried not to think about the service exit and whether Cato had gotten there first or Prescott had. At 10:40, Raymond appeared at her shoulder. He was one of Cato's men, a large, quiet person who communicated mostly through head tilts. He tilted his head toward the door. She followed. Cato was in the lobby, his tuxedo still immaculate. He was speaking into his phone in a voice too low to hear. He looked up when she appeared, and he ended the call without taking his eyes off her. He crossed the lobby and stopped in front of her and looked at her for a long moment, as if taking inventory of the fact of her continued existence. "Prescott is in federal custody," he said. "The councilman will be by morning. Harwick and Aldgate are no longer a concern." Penny processed this. "Are you all right?" she asked. Something shifted in his face. "Yes," he said. Then, after a pause, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I have never once been asked that in a way that meant it." The lobby of the Meridian Foundation was full of Detroit's most powerful people, redistributing themselves between the dinner and the night ahead. Cato Aldano stood in the center of that room and reached out and took Penny Boone's hand in both of his. It was not a small gesture from a man like him. The room noticed immediately. She could feel the specific frequency of attention that people generate when they are recalibrating what they think they know. "You told me you stayed because I was decent to you," Cato said. "I need to tell you something in return." He held her hand carefully, the way you hold something you are only now understanding the value of. "I have sat in that restaurant for 18 months watching you work. I have watched people treat you like you were less than what you are, over and over again, and I have watched you absorb it and carry on without a single crack in your composure. And I told myself it wasn't my place to say anything, that it wasn't my business." His jaw tightened slightly. "I was wrong about that, and I won't be wrong about it again." The crowd murmured around them. The orchestra had started playing again, somewhere back in the Grand Hall, something low and warm. Penny looked at him. She had spent 27 years in rooms where she was the last thing anyone looked at. She had learned to navigate that, to use it, to make herself so fluent in invisibility that it became its own kind of power. But standing in this lobby with this particular man's eyes on her, not looking past her, not looking through her, but at her with a directness that left her nowhere to hide, she felt the strangest sensation. Like the outline of herself was becoming more solid, like she was filling in. "You have a lot of very serious enemies," she said. "I know," said Cato, "and your inner circle just got significantly smaller. Yes, you're going to need someone you can trust. I'm standing next to her," he said. Outside, the November wind was shredding the last of the leaves off the trees along Woodward Avenue. Inside the Meridian Foundation lobby, Detroit's underworld and its overworld stood together in their expensive clothes and watched Cato Aldano look at a woman they had all looked past, and understood, for the first time, exactly what that said about their own judgment. Penny Boone had walked into the Starling Club 3 years ago, carrying plates and swallowing insults, and cataloguing everything no one thought she was worth cataloguing. She walked out of the Meridian that night carrying nothing at all, because the man beside her had made it entirely clear that she would never have to carry anything alone again.